Welcome 5th and 6th graders to our first panel of RePublic Science. You have discussions this week to work on, and it's all about conservation biology. So we want to bring you two of your awesome teachers who not only know something about it, but have worked around the world in helping keep our animals and ecosystems safe. Enjoy. So to get started, I am super excited that both of you are here, Miss Grimes and Mr. Scott. We are really excited to be able to present a little bit about conservational biology because that's what both 5th and 6th grade assignments are this week at RePublic Science. The cool thing is that you guys are conservational biologists and I'm not. So you guys get to talk about what actually happened in your lives, whereas kids are just reading about it or watching videos about it. Normally, I wanted to give this as an opportunity for you to actually express what a conservational biologist does and respond to the questions that we're talking about. Is why is conservational biology important? Why is human impact an important thing that we should all know about? And why don't people believe that we are actually impacting the environment? So to start out, I'll go with Miss Grimes. Can you introduce yourself a little bit, both as a teacher and as a conservational biologist?
Yes. Hey y'all, I'm Miss Grimes. I teach 6th grade science at Nashville Prep. This is my first year, and before teaching, I was a sea turtle biologist, and so I've lived in Texas, in Florida, and shortly in St. Croix, which is one of the Virgin Islands, just doing conservation work with all different species, 4 of the 7 species of sea turtles. And yeah, so that most of my experience is on the coast, and so it'll be interesting if Mr. Scott has any like terrestrial experience.
Oh my God.
That's really awesome. And Mr. Scott, can you talk a little bit about yourself as a teacher and as a conservational biologist?
Yeah, so my name is Mr. Scott. I teach 5th grade at LCA. I'll be going into my 3rd year once all this stuff settles down. My background is in African terrestrial biology, so mainly working in savanna grasslands and what we call bushveld, which is like a scattered ecosystem of acacia trees. So I'm thankful that Ms. Grimes has more of a marine approach because that's a biome that I know very little bit about. But I started working in Africa prior to this about 5 years ago and have worked off and on there. And that's what I do for summer vacation is go over there and do research. So
That's really amazing. I'll keep going with you, Mr. Scott, here, just so that we can continue talking about this. And then I'm going to ask the same question to you, Ms. Grimes. What got you all into conservational biology? Particularly, you described some very specific things, Mr. Scott, like acacia trees and terrestrial biology in Africa. What got you into that? How did you go to Africa doing something like
sorry, I'm just trying to figure out the keyboard shortcuts so I'm not so slow. Let me see. Put it simply, my dad has always been a lifetime outdoorsman. So I'm really interested in the ways that conservation is a community or family based affair. So it started with that interest in animals and wildlife at a young age. My heroes growing up were like Steve Irwin, Jeff Corwin, guys like that. So I reached a point in my life where I was doing things that I really didn't want to do. And so, long story short, I sold everything, had made previous connections in Africa, and so I went over there and studied there full time for about 6 months, and then began branching out and working with safaris and like ecotourism. And then from there, had a lot of contacts who were conservation biologists or rangers in game parks. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Moved away from the safari guiding as so much, and so now I do try to do a lot of research and more like narrative writing just about experience because I think it's important for young people to have mentors who kind of open the door for them to be able to go from where they're at to be able to do stuff like that in the future.
That's really amazing. I love the idea that like you went from just liking the outdoors and having a lot of experience that within your family to the idea like actually, you know what, there's some cool things that I can study about this, and then of doing cool things like going to Africa over it. I'd like to hear from you too, Miss Grimes. Like, how did you come into conservational biology, and what was your experience of end up studying it, and then doing things like cool things like marine life?
Yeah, so I went to school, I went to college in biology, and nearing like my senior year, they were saying how, oh, we really prefer people to like have an internship before you graduate. And everyone else in the bio program was pre-med. And so my professors didn't really know what to do with me. So a lot of it was just me researching it on my own and like trying to find something. And I always wanted to move to Florida because Chicago is very cold. And I was like looking at all these different places down there, ended up like finding a research lab in Sarasota, and just literally went through an entire list of all of their internships and landed on nighttime tagging sea turtles. And so when I got that, me and one other person, we were like riding ATVs on the beach every night, waiting for female sea turtles to come up and nest. And so we were tagging them and doing that kind of thing. And then it just ended up like you get in the sea turtle world and all of your connections end up being in the sea turtle world. So I moved from there. Then I had to go back and finish college, and then ended up back in Texas because I missed the turtles. And like most of it was field work. And so being out on the beaches, like counting eggs and doing stuff like that. And then when I got to Texas, a little bit more of it moved into rehabilitation and like helping animals that had been struck by boats or caught up in entanglement from nets or had eaten plastic. And then doing a lot of that like community outreach part of it. So that was really fun. Again, like then I went to St. Croix, and that was more beach work. So.
That's really amazing. And so I'd like to kind of extend from there. So you said you were doing some beach work. You happened to, come into this opportunity through an internship. In all of your work, how did you see that humans were impacting the environment, in particular animals within the environment? You started to talk about it a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about it.
Yeah. So this was a lot of it started kind of in Florida, when just being on the beach, like you can see how much people are affecting it in terms of like houses being built literally right on the water. And so a bunch of turtles would come up and they'd have no sand to nest on. And so they end up going back in the water. And for turtles, like all sea turtles are protected under the Endangered Species Act because their populations are low. But part of that is just because they have a lot of eggs, but a lot of them don't hatch or they just get picked off. And so when we don't have beaches for them to nest on, like we're automatically impacting their population levels. But then in Texas, like a lot of it was, oh, this turtle is stranded because it's just really lethargic, it's really tired. And then we end up taking an MRI or a CAT scan or an X-ray and finding out that they have eaten a bunch of plastic, like plastic bags, or they have fish hooks stuck in their throat and so they can't eat because it hurts too much, or they're just like entangled in a bunch of fishing nets that people have left out after doing normal legal fishing in the ocean, and they just don't pick up their garbage. And so a lot of that was what we were dealing with in Texas.
That's really crazy that there was so much that was happening in Texas that caused, a lot of damage to these sea turtles. What do you think? What's one piece of advice you could give to people to say like, hey, we saw this impact with turtles. Here's what you can do to ensure that like there isn't this damage to sea turtles.
Yeah, like the one thing, just be super conscious of like picking up your garbage and making sure that it like goes in the garbage. If you see garbage on the street, like I'm the weird person who's always picking up trash, like even if it's not mine. But a lot of it too is we're not like Tennessee's not on the ocean. A lot of people don't think about it. And so on the beach, like there's volunteer programs to pick up garbage, but you don't really connect it as much. Like my garbage here in Tennessee can be affecting things in the ocean. But the way that the garbage system works, like, yes, it can. So it's just being responsible with your actual trash.
Yeah, that's amazing. And turning it over to you a little bit here, Mr. Scott, what were some of the ways that you saw that humans were impacting the environment where you were at in Africa?
First of all, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. Having some issues. Yeah, so one of the ways that I first saw human impact in Africa is in the ecotourism sector. And the reason that that is so prevalent or heavily involved is because um, it is an industry that's based around people coming to see wildlife. So because of that, there's certain infrastructure that needs to be involved, for instance, building roads or hotels or resorts or what have you, for these people to come and stay. And a lot of those things naturally, sorry, I'm getting some echo.
Very good.
A lot of those things naturally disrupt ecosystems and biomes. And so one of the things that is important from a broad perspective in conservation biology is the issue of biodiversity, or the diversity of animals and plants that live within that ecosystem. So one of the things that we don't notice as humans a lot is some of the like smaller critters and things like that, and
Yeah.
how they're negatively infected. Um, Birds are one of the highest markers of biodiversity. So basically, if you have the number of birds that your ecosystem should have, that's a good indication that you're maintaining biodiversity. However, when we start to build like roads and telephone poles, different infrastructure like that, it disturbs a lot of native habitat for animals like that. Um, and I think I don't want to jump ahead, but you had a question about like, why do humans not realize what's
Yeah,
happening sometimes? How do they not realize how they're affecting habitat? And
exactly.
I think there's a couple things. I think number one, like a lot of us just live very much removed from the wild, so it's not something we see on a regular basis. It's not something that we're aware of until we hear that, the numbers of rhinos across Africa are reduced to 1% of their previous historic range or something like that. So I
Yeah.
think it's being removed, and I also think
Why isn't it one of those meetings?
we just have a tendency to focus more on like big animal species or big markers of conservation change. And so when we have like insects and amphibians and reptiles and birds and stuff like that disappearing, we don't notice it as much because our eyes maybe just aren't drawn to those types of animals as much.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was wondering, you talked a little bit earlier, Mr. Scott, about the fact that like you have a couple of visuals, you have a couple of things that we might be able to see from your time there in Africa, so that we can maybe visualize a little bit what you're talking about, the type of impact that people might have on animals. Do you think that you might be able to show us a couple of those things?
Yeah, so I don't have any photos specifically of like habitat degradation or
Uh-huh.
trees being cut down or anything like that. And let's see, can I share this screen still?
Yeah, should be able to.
Okay. Oh, here we go. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
The elephant?
Yep, we can see.
Okay, so here's just some examples of ways that human impact can have a positive or a negative effect on habitat or on conservation. And you can just read over those. But like when we talk about agriculture and forestry, everyone has to eat, everyone needs shelter. Um, but there's a responsible way to do it and there's an irresponsible way to do it. So, for instance, in this photo, you see an elephant, excuse me, you see an elephant that is like throwing water on itself with its trunk to cool
Yeah.
itself off and stuff like that. Um, and one of the ways that we can have a negative impact is our use of water. So even
Yeah.
in South Africa 2 years ago, they had like they had a national drought, so people were limited to using a certain amount of water per day. And while water has a natural cycle, there are ways that we can like negatively disrupt it by building dams or using too much natural water. So that's like just one specific example. Without this water, the elephant isn't going to be able to cool itself, and it just disrupts, excuse me, more natural processes.
For sure. And I was wondering, like, did you ever see elephants like this or landscapes like this while you were in Africa?
Yeah, this is a photo I took.
No way. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So I worked with a guy who's a very popular um, elephant guide in South Africa, and so we did quite a lot of approaches on foot or in a vehicle or whatever. So that was one of the projects that I worked on, was studying. Well, it's still an ongoing project, but studying elephants and their habitat, effects that they even have on their own habitat, and stuff like that. But yeah, that's a photo that I took.
That's amazing. What's one thing that like maybe people can't notice just from the photo, but you being there, like it was really obvious to you?
Specifically with regard to like conservation.
Yeah, conservation or just the environment in general. Because like I see this and it looks like something I would see on National Geographic, and I think, oh yeah, an elephant in a field. But like, tell us a little bit about like what's it like being there, and what is the environment like that this elephant's living in?
Yeah, so, good question. One thing I would actually point out is this water source in the picture is actually an artificial water source.
Really?
So this water is actually being pumped in. There's a lot of reasons, probably maybe outside the scope of this conversation, but basically, in my experience, people do not want to come to Africa to go on safari if they can't see big elephants, stuff like
Mm,
that. You know, we have a saying, the big five. So there's basically five animals that people want to see. Elephants are
yeah.
one of them, but they're heavily water dependent. So a lot of national parks and private reserves pump in water in order
Oh
for
wow.
the elephants to stay localized in that environment in order for people to be able to see them.
Wow.
So that's an example of like a large scale, kind of like from the top down. People won't come to see animals in Africa if they can't see animals in Africa. So because of that, this is what we as humans do in order to increase the chances of that. And then as a result, there's negative consequences. Like I said, this is artificial water that's being pumped, so it's very localized. It's not in the ground, so it doesn't play a part. It doesn't play as big of a part in the natural water cycle. Um, yeah, and so as a result, elephant numbers are crazy. And just as a side note, elephants are very like destructive.
How so?
People call them like like environmental engineers.
How so?
So
Why is that?
yeah, it can be a good thing or a bad thing. But a lot of elephants, especially the males, which are called bulls, will just like destroy trees. It's almost like a
Wow.
it's almost like a macho thing, like they're trying to show off to the lady elephants or something like that. But you can see um, like if you go through a habitat, you can see, for example, like mature trees. We're talking about trees that are like 100 years old that have been destroyed by elephants for no like particular reason. Um,
Interesting.
And so then as a result, you got to think like the birds that would live in those trees can't live there. And
Yeah, and so,
if they're
yeah,
contained by water, then they will they will stay in that area and create like a epicenter of habitat uh, degradation or habitat loss if not properly managed.
that's amazing. And I can just imagine that, like, if we're also trying to like herd the elephants into one particular area and they're so destructive, like that can be pretty disruptive to to other types of ecosystems that are, where we're moving them to, and then trying to truck a bunch of people through them for them to see them. I can only imagine, like, there's a huge impact there. And I wanted to turn to you a little bit too, Miss Grimes. Like, what what types of things did you see that, like, yeah, so I can Google some pictures of things like sea turtles and whatnot, but like, what do most people not understand about sea turtles and their environments that you saw that you'd like to tell us about?
Let me try and share my screen. I don't know if I have any real pictures that explain that as clear. Um,
Oh, that's okay.
they kind of just show like what I was doing, oh my gosh, on a daily basis. Um, and so, oh, there's my little babies. So we did full beach protection basically in Texas. And so if I can get to, there's a lot of pictures here. I'll be like going back and forth. But so on the beaches, like it's really hard for people to find, like if you're not looking, it's really easy to just overlook them. And part of that is like because you have to look for very specific things. And so from the beach, like you can't really tell that there's a turtle nest there. And you can see all the tire tracks because a lot of beaches all over Texas, public beaches, you're allowed to drive on. And a lot of people drive, like the turtles will nest right where people are driving. So nests are being destroyed every day just from like cars driving on the beach. And people don't
Wow.
necessarily, like, I didn't know that because I had never heard of people driving on the beach other than like in Daytona Beach in Florida. Um, and so a lot of them are just ruined every day based on like people's beach activities. Um, and so you're looking for really specific stuff. And then we also had to do excavations. And so part of like our job was to find the nest, but also then dig it up and carefully like move all of the eggs to a different place on the beach that was fenced in. And then we let them hatch from there. And then we count everybody and we do public releases. And that's kind of our way, like, of getting the public more involved, but also
Yeah.
from a safer distance. A lot of people that we'd have like hundreds of people coming to our releases from all over the world. And it's just
Wow.
because people don't get to see sea turtles and you have a hard time protecting or like caring about things that you can't feel connected to. Like Mr. Scott brought up, like people are just
Yeah.
removed from the wild. And so part of it is trying to get people more involved in the wild while also
Yeah.
like keeping them a safe distance away. And so the releases just like give you kind of a glimpse into like the life full circle because like we have our babies and then we also did like rehabilitation. So that's me with one of the
Wow.
boat strike victims. Um, a lot of ours were entangled. The one on the left was entangled. The one that I'm holding was actually struck by a boat and had completely cracked their shell.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh.
the facility has some resident turtles. So the one on the left in this picture is a resident. He is missing a flipper, and he was I think struck by a boat if I remember correctly, missing a flipper, but also has like brain damage from his accident, so he can't be released back into the wild. Um,
Wow.
so there were 7 resident turtles there, and we kind of use them as like ambassadors. So people, you still can't touch them, but people just getting up close and like seeing, oh, we have examples like this is the actual net that this animal was caught in and why they lost 3 of their 4 flippers, or like
Wow.
this is the fish hook that we pulled out of their stomach and why they weren't able to eat for who knows how long.
Wow.
And then we also would do like public releases of adult or juvenile turtles. So the ones on the right are actually in a baby pool on their way back out after being rehabilitated. And so people would come just to like have that moment of like, it's kind of just like a feel good human moment of like, wow, like people helped them and now they're able to go back into their environment. And I think it really just like comes down to getting people to see it, even if you don't like live near it. Like here, she's nesting, but like you'd have no idea that like she only has like 2 feet of beach before an actual resort. So she's like
Wow.
in the backyard of this hotel, and people are just casually walking by as she's trying to like nest and get back to the beach. A lot of beach lighting people don't think about, like a regular light at a resort at nighttime to a turtle looks like the moon. And
Oh,
so
wow.
having lights on when babies are hatching at nighttime, we find a lot of them like in people's pools or stuck on the other side of the road, and now they can't like figure out how to cross back over to get to the water. And so making sure that beaches like have changed their lighting is like a huge policy push that's going on all over the coast, everywhere. But yeah, it's just like no one thinks about the light on their condo or their house as being like super important to conservation of these endangered species, but it's actually really, really important.
Wow, that's really amazing. I'd like you to talk a little bit about, so yeah, if all of these turtles died off, number one, we wouldn't have like these beautiful creatures walking around beaches, but what else would happen to the ecosystem if we lost turtles in particular?
Yeah. So all species of sea turtles, they all like all seven eat very different things. The green turtles, they're green because they eat so much seagrass and plants that the people who eat sea turtles in different parts of the world, like the meat actually is tinged green or can be very
Really?
green. Yeah. And so you'd have crazy plant overgrowth if no one was eating all of the seagrass. And that just kind of throws it off. It creates more buildup of bacteria and things like that in the ocean that they kind of keep in line for other animals and things that live in the shallow water. And then you have like this type of turtle eats a bunch of blue crabs. Other turtles, like leatherbacks, the largest one, their
Mhm.
diet is completely jellyfish for the most, like
Really?
99.5% jellyfish. And without them, like jellyfish literally would take over the ocean pretty much.
Wow.
They eat about half their body weight, and they can be like up to 1,400 pounds. Like they can be gigantic. So they're just taking
That's
huge
crazy.
amounts of jellyfish and like balancing out the ecosystem that way. And that happens with each species, just with a different type of food.
That's crazy. Yeah, I had no clue that they controlled jellyfish in particular. That's nuts. And how about for you, Mr. Scott? Like, obviously, it's really cool to see elephants, right? But what else would happen to the environment if we didn't have elephants in particular?
Yeah, I think elephants play a similar role as far as vegetation goes. In certain areas, like especially places where there are strong seasonal rains. So there's a place in Botswana called the Okavango Delta that when the first rains come, the elephants are the only ones who are able to access the floodplain. So they basically like march through, like if you've ever seen the Jungle Book, they march through like that with their trunks in the air and they clear a path for um, like the rest of animals that are dependent on the water source and dependent on vegetation to come through.
No
So
way.
there would be a lot of like seasonal cycles like that are disrupted. Um, in South Africa, in park, they also help to elephants actually like can dig water out of riverbeds in areas where there's sand, providing an alternative water source for other animals. So that's a pretty key component of how they function. in their own habitat.
That's amazing. I wanted to kind of end on, before we get to students potentially asking questions if they're interested. If I want to go into the work that you guys did, so if I want to go to Africa and work in conservation biology, what should I be doing if I'm a middle schooler right now? And then Ms. Grimes, I'm going to ask the same question to you about going into marine biology. So, Mr. Scott, if you wouldn't mind going first, what if I want to work in conservation biology in Africa and I'm a middle schooler, what should I do now to prepare?
Yeah, if you want to work in conservation biology, I think it's just important to do well in like talking about matter. And then when we're talking about life science and ecosystems and environment, it's important to understand how food webs work, how the water cycle works, and just how the biggest piece is how things in an environment relate with one another. So, what are interactions between animals and plants like? What are interactions between birds and insects like? Conservation biology for me is a lot about relationships between members in that biome or in that natural area that they live. So a heavy focus on that is really important and sets you up very well for high school. And then you get to college and know more than everyone else, which is always great.
That's amazing. And how about for you, Ms. Grimes? What should a middle schooler be thinking about or doing right now if they want to prepare to be a marine conservation biologist?
I would second everything that Mr. Scott said, but also like not just the way that the ecosystem and animals themselves are like interacting, but like what is your place in that? How are you or like humans fitting into that piece of the like as that piece of the puzzle, and just constantly like trying to learn more about it. Like if you really want to do it, even if you think you're kind of interested and it might be an option, like always just looking, like watching videos. There's so much, like National Geographic is amazing, and I wish they had as awesome videos when we were little as they do right now. But there's just so much information out there. Like you don't have to work with big elephants or sea turtles, like these crazy species, to have a huge impact on conservation biology. Like there's, if you think about it, like a random fact is like amphibians are having a giant like extinction crisis, and nobody really thinks about frogs and salamanders and stuff like that, but they're ending up to be one of the bigger pieces of conservation biology, like biodiversity issues right now. And just like continuing to stay interested in stuff and like doing work on your own and not just waiting for it just to be in class, but watching videos outside of class kind of keeps you ahead of the game in terms of being prepared for a job.
That's amazing. Any students here, what questions do you guys have for our resident conservational biologists?
I do. Me.
Yep, go ahead. Is it
Hey,
Lalini?
my question is, so how is it like possible to keep track of all of those animals out there? Because it's a huge ecosystem filled with a lot of animals.
So yeah, how do you guys keep track of all of these different types of animals?
Is it possible to have a turtle as a pet?
No, sea turtles you cannot have as a pet. You actually will get arrested for that. I've seen it happen.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, people try and keep them in fish tanks. They like think they're stranded, but you have to turn it in, and people don't report that they have a stranded sea turtle and then think it's going to be a nice pet. But they can be like, even the smallest one gets up to about 100, 150 pounds. So they become completely impossible to take care of. And like I said, the largest one can be almost 2,000 pounds. But for the first question, I'll let Mr. Scott also have a turn. But for turtles and stuff, like every turtle that we come into contact, we tag. If it's an adult, we give it 2 tags on the front 2 flippers that have a code on it. And then we also give them microchips, just like you give your dog or your cat. we are able to put those in their flipper, and then when they come up to nest, or if you're working and actually catching them in the ocean, you can just scan them really quick and you'll know if you've seen this one before, if it's new, and if you have seen it, where it was before, and kind of keep track of it that way. We also have some that will put satellite tags on, and it can actually track every movement they make for as many years as it's set up. It's purposely built to break off after so many years. And there's a lot of websites. You can just Google it. I can't think of one specific one. I think Sea Turtles, like SEE, turtles.org, keeps a log, and you can see where all the sea turtles with satellite trackers that have satellite trackers are moving.
That's really cool. How about for you, Mr. Scott? Any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, we use similar methods for tagging animals, microchipping animals, for research purposes. Like rhinos have they have distinctive ears, and so it's almost like a thumbprint. Each rhino will have a different looking ear or different notches on it, or etc. I think if you're not actively out in the field, like Ms. Grimes said, a resource like that keeps track of sea turtles is cool to look at. You should also check out your local, if you Google search Tennessee watchable wildlife, it will give you reports on fish numbers, bird numbers, animal numbers, deer, stuff like that. So to say it again, just your local level, whatever community you're involved in, will have information. And then you can also look at more global, international stuff like World Wildlife Federation to see what they're working on, things like that.
That's so cool. Lanaya had a question. Lanaya, why don't you go?
My question is it hard being a biologist?
Ms. Grimes, why don't you take that one first?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, especially if you're out in the field. Like, it's long hours. I have worked 18, 24 hours straight, just making sure that I don't miss something or keeping something protected when you're working the night shift. But I mean, if you really love it, like, it doesn't really matter how hard it is or how many hours straight you're working. And I mean, it goes for basically every profession, but you can always like find something in the work that makes it way more fun than it is hard.
That's amazing. How about you, Mr. Scott?
Yeah, I agree. I think as you like, if conservation biology is what you're interested in, when you're doing something you love for work, it really feels like, it's like the old saying, time flies when you're having fun. I'd never even think of it as work because it's what I would prefer to be doing anyway. Like I would prefer to be out in the field looking at elephants or looking at lions, taking notes on them. So it just like, I think when it's your passion, um, when it's your passion, it's connected to what you already want to do. So it doesn't even feel like a job. It feels very fortunate. You're like, I get paid for doing what I love, which is great, which is how I feel as a teacher, of course.
It's amazing. Nick had a question. Nick, go ahead.
So would you say that you would enjoy your job as a biologist even if the hours are long?
Absolutely. Like, I have done work for no pay, working obscene hours, way too many hours. I've also, like, when I was in Texas, I got $35 a day. That's nothing. $35 a day. And I was like, oh my God, look, like, what is this job? I'm playing with sea turtles all day. And I'm like, it's insane. Yes, yes, yes.
How
Yeah,
about you, Miss?
yeah, sorry. Something I would say, CJ, too, is just back to the question of what should you do as a middle schooler. One of the things that you could do is start looking into ways to volunteer. There's a lot of different organizations, of course, and I can link these up with you, but there's a lot of organizations that conservation organizations that actually need volunteers because of a lack of funding or something like that. So being a volunteer is the best way to maybe get involved with whatever project or passion that you're interested in. That combined with your studies will help you down the road to be able to do it professionally. Um, Maybe not at your age, but like in a few years, we can talk about this. Since I'm your teacher, we can talk about this. But yeah, like I said, you're gonna have to do something for a living. You might as well do something that you love. So
I have a question. Uh, I want to know if we can swim with sea turtles.
What was that?
I had a question. I always dreamed of swimming with a sea turtle.
I'm missing the middle of it. Does someone hear it?
Wait, say it one more time, really close into your mic.
he's asking if you can swim with him.
I'm asking, is it possible to swim with a sea turtle?
Okay, to swim with them. In the US, because they're protected, you're not supposed to. If you are out in the ocean and one swims up to you, it happens. But you can't like actively jump off of a boat into the water to touch one. But yeah, they have really strong beaks. Like they kind of have beaks like a bird, and they will definitely, if they feel threatened, bite you. My friend is missing the top half of his pinky finger. I have had a boss who was bit in the leg while we were trying to tag one. It's not pleasant. So let them and all wildlife have their space.
Yeah, I think an important thing, just because you can do something, should you do something? And um, I'm sure it would be a magical experience to swim with sea turtles, but you also have to remember that these are wild animals, and just like humans, they have personal space and they have boundaries. And they probably look to you as a threat or some sort of predator. So, like swimming with them could possibly like have a negative impact on them psychologically or etc. But that was a great question.
Yeah, also to add, like they can also carry diseases that they can pass on to people, like Lyme disease, I think is one of them. But like they have different bacteria on their shells and on their flippers, and so you don't want to touch them even for your own safety, so that I think I froze, I don't know, so that you aren't getting sick.
Wow. I think we have time for one more question. If there are any other questions out there from students.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of hogging them all up, ain't I? So being a biologist would sound fun, but is there any other like, like maybe other type of any other white work, like maybe paperwork you have to do to submit it, or like a lot of is there a large amount of studying you have to do with stuff like that? Or is it something you can just volunteer for and just make sure you know just enough in order to take care of them?
I can start with this one. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Is it just okay? Um, to simply answer your question, yes, there is a lot of paperwork once you get to that level where people are expecting you to produce research or to produce articles or do some sort of presentation or something like that. I think at your age, what's most important is to get a general background of how the natural world works. Because when we're talking about being a biologist, you're really talking about the science of life, right? So that can be bacteria, plants, animals, etc. It can be a lot of different things. So, as with a lot of other professions or jobs, you start from a general understanding, right? So, at your age, you can start with life science and ecosystems and stuff like that matter. Then, as you get older, you become increasingly more, what's the word I'm trying to say? Like selective, right? So now you would study life science in general biology, then maybe in high school, you go into conservation biology and you're more interested in that. Then in university, maybe you go specifically into animal science. So it's almost like a pyramid. Right now, you need a good foundation. And then as you get older, it will taper more or come more to a point of what you specifically want to do. And then at that point, the requirements are going to be different. I hope that answers your question. That's how I think about it. So I hope that's helpful, but I'm not sure if I answered your question.
That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Well, I really appreciate our awesome conservational biologists here at RePublic talking to us today. You guys are awesome. Is there one thing that you want everyone else? You guys said a lot of really great things, particularly about human impact on the environment, but is there one thing that you'd like to leave us that based on your work you think that we as humans should be doing so that we can minimize our impact, our negative impact on the environment?
Do not throw plastic on the ground.
It's a good one. How about you, Ms. Grimes or Mr. Scott?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, stay conscious of like you, but also just stay interested. Like, you can try your best to like keep your garbage and throw it away, but the more important thing is like to stay, like, watch those extra videos. If you are really interested in it, like, you cannot learn too much about it, and every extra thing that you learn about it, you're gonna have more information to make better decisions. So just keep learning about it. That's the best way that we can like get people to care about it more.
Yeah, I agree. I think the majority of the world's problems, especially with environment, have to do with being either ignorant of something, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You can't always help whether you're ignorant, and being isolated from something. So the best thing you can do, like Miss Grimes said, is to educate yourself. If you're wondering about climate change or you're wondering about how plastic affects the environment, do National Geographic, how does plastic affect the environment? Google is such a good tool that you can use as long as you're looking at the right stuff. And then the other thing I would say is I lost my train of thought. Oh, think about your day to day life and the things that you do in your day to day life, and try to make connections between the natural world. So, like if I get up and eat breakfast, how does that maybe impact either in a positive or negative way the environment? Like, where do I get my food from? Where do I get my clothes from, etc. I think just trying to make connections with things that are outside of yourself, whether it's other people or the environment, I think is just helpful to be more aware of what your role is.
Well, with that, I really appreciate your guys' time. I'm going to be really excited to publish this a little bit later on our assignment for this week so that everyone else can watch it too. Students, make sure that you're using what you hear in your responses. Look at those criteria for success. They pretty much outline for you everything you need to know to be able to do great responses and then replies to your fellow students. So you guys have a great week. Thanks, Ms. Grimes and Mr. Scott again for everything that you guys did today. We'll see y'all soon.